Hey y'all, I'm back. Wasn't that a great interview with Mama Kosowa? Y'all got to check out the International Locks Conference in Philadelphia. So I believe it's in October. But we're going to have her back because she shared a lot of jewels and a lot of gems that we need to hear, particularly around history, freedom fighters, people who put in work. We need to be able to hear from them. And now I'm with another brother, elder, somebody who I highly respect, and he's going to shed some light on us around Africa, spiritual systems and traditions and all of that good stuff. Welcome, Minister Imhotep.
I'm so honored to be here on your show, and it's like we've done this before, which was years ago, and now look how much you've grown, and I'm just so proud of the things that you're doing, and just glad to be with you.
Thank you, thank you. So are you originally from Sacramento?
I'm originally from West Oakland, and people that are from West Oakland, they say West Oakland. They don't just say Oakland.
Right.
And where I grew up was 2 blocks from where the Panthers had their rallies at a park called Defirmary Park, which was renamed Bobby Hutton Park after a youth that was killed by the police when he was 16.
Wow. What was it like growing up in the midst of where the Panthers were?
So I was only 10 when it happened, and so I could not participate. A lot of people were afraid, but the Black Panthers, in my opinion, were needed. My father was probably he probably might be insulted by this, but one of the squarest guys, pocket protector and everything. He worked for the phone company. I think he was the first African American to work in that position, higher than a janitor, getting out of the Navy. And one of his Navy friends came to visit him, and my mother in West Oakland, and he was white. And my father was walking him to the bus stop, after he came by for dinner. My father was walking him to the bus stop, and he was hassled by the police. They were accusing my father of being a pimp to, direct this, white gentleman, to prostitutes. And my father was very upset about that. He wanted to fight it, but he knew some people on the force that said, hey, man, it's not going to go anywhere. Don't even, try. But it's just a story that I told him. So, if that was happening to people like him, and then later on you find out that, the police departments in Oakland and LA were getting people from the South to be, So it was an exciting time. Assassination of Martin Luther King in April 4th, 68. And then a few months later, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. People were getting assassinated, major people. My parents were activists. They were part of a group called Oak Center Neighborhood Association. And I knew about Robert's Rules of Order in the first grade. My parents would drag me to meet, mostly my mom, drag me to meetings at Lowell Junior High, and they'd be fighting City Hall, they'd be fighting urban renewal, and one of the purposes of that organization was to stop urban renewal from tearing down all the Victorian houses and making them all like the Acorn Apartments. They were successful in that, and they became a model for the rest of the country. It was an organization founded by a sister, Lillian Love. She was really good friends with my mother, and it just started out with a handful of people, and so that's how I grew up. I was bused to school from the flatlands to the hills of Oakland.
What school did you go to?
I went to Skyline High School in Oakland, but where I lived, I was supposed to go to McClymonds. Yeah, McClymonds is like a school of champions. Bill Russell, Frank Robinson, a lot of greats that were in sports, Jim Hines, etc.
So in your teen years, what was your high school like? Did you learn about Africa and in that time,
Well,
being in Oakland?
if I could start here, you know, in the Bay Area, we had two great soul stations. And one of them was KDIA. It was an AM station, 1310, and we had station KSOL, and we had a station before KBLX. It was KRE, and it was on AM and FM. And on KDIA, there was a brother that came on the radio. He's since passed now, I think within the last couple of years. And his name was Donald Warden, and he changed his name to Khalid Abdullah Tariq El Mansour. And he was an attorney. He began to represent the Saudis during the whole oil embargo, and he would come on every Saturday evening, and then he switched to Sundays. He had a TV show called Black Dignity.
Wow. And
so you know, that's how I kind of got my chops in Black history, African history, listening to him. And but when I went to high school, there was nothing. It's probably one of the reasons why I'm like I am now, because there was nothing. I remember being in a world history class, and they were talking about ancient Egypt, which we now know as Kemet.
Right.
But we weren't there. We weren't pictured there. And I knew that they were Africans, but I did not have any documentation at that time. And so I heard something on KDIA on College Show one day, and they were talking about a book by Sheikh Anta Diop called African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. And then I ended up going to San Francisco State, the place where the first Black Studies program, and a lot of wonderful professors, Dr. Ray Richardson, co-owner of Marcus Bookstore, Dr. Oba Tashaka, Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Wade Nobles, Richard King. So all those people were there. Angela Davis was there at the same time, you know, before she became a professor out at UC Santa Cruz. So, you know, I just kind of got inundated. I immersed myself in finding out about our people because we weren't told about it elementary, junior high, high school.
So you started learning about this in your high school years or when you got to college?
Well, mainly when I got to college, because there was nothing at the time. We're talking, so I entered high school 73, we're talking the year 73 to 76.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you started to learn about Africa, how did that make you feel?
Well, it kind of made me feel like this is what I've been talking about. You know, this is what I've been waiting to learn about. So that year I started at San Francisco State was the same year Roots came out, the first one, and you know, back then, you know, there weren't that many TV channels, and so everybody was glued to that show. And so there was a great, you know, swell of African recognition. You know, also on the campus, they had a wonderful African dance troupe called Wajumbe dance troupe. And I think Wajumbe meant we bring a message. They were invited to Nigeria to perform. They performed all over the Bay Area at all programs, and they would perform on campus. And so it was just a lot of culture there at the time. And when I started at San Francisco State, there was an all-Black student union slate had just won.
Wow.
So the president of the associate students was a brother by the name of Ibidi Umtambuzi. I think one of his names means true man. You know, there's a sister that actually, I can't think of her name, but she actually relocated to Sacramento. I remember seeing her up here at a time. So the whole, so I'm talking about the president, the vice president, the treasurer, you know, a lot of people were involved in that. So I just got immersed in the culture, immersed in the studies. It's something that I wanted to do. Even though I was a business major, I tried to take as many Black studies as would be allowed.
Were you ever in any of Sister Queen Mother Sonia Sanchez's classes?
No, I was not. But I tell you, we had a brother here. His name was Abrafo Ankh Alman. He was a member of our church at Woolsey Community Church. His given name was Henry Andrews, and he was part of that migration of African Americans from Mobile, Alabama to Sacramento, and so he stayed in the north area around McClellan Air Force Base, and so he was a member of our church, and actually sang at our wedding, me and my wife's wedding, and he decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to go to San Francisco State and get a master's in Black Studies, and he did. And he was a kind of a brother that sang like Paul Robeson.
Ooh.
And so he would open up programs. And that song in School Day, I'm building me. He would sing that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Your voice sounds like that too.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
So he would do poetry, and just a great brother. Well, from San Francisco State, he went on to Temple and studied there under Malefi Asante. However, he ended up passing away before he could get his PhD, and his PhD was granted to him posthumously. And because I married him and his wife. I officiated at their wedding, and he had a really good friend because he went to UC Davis at the time of Bakke, and he had a really good friend by the name of Larry Mosley, who was able to fly me there while he was convalescing, and then after he passed, he flew me back to officiate at the homegoing, and Sonia Sanchez was there doing poetry, so that's how I got to meet her.
Wow. Your name?
Imhotep Alkebulan.
What does that mean?
Imhotep, generally, it means he who came in peace, and Imhotep is the third dynastic priest. And generally, he's credited with designing the step pyramid at a place called Saqqara. But recently, and I'm always my information is always evolving, and I'm getting more and more information. And I've been reading this scholar. His name is Stephen Mailer, and he studied with a indigenous wisdom keeper in Kemet, who grew up in Kemet. You open up your window, you can see the pyramids from, when he was a kid, he used to go under the tunnels and the pyramids and stuff like that. So he studied with him, and I just had a discussion with him recently. And he explained that Hakim told him that Imhotep was not a name, that it was a title of healers. And the Imhotep that we know now is the last of those healers who could heal people through sound vibration.
Wow. How did you, and then your last name is?
Alkebulan. I got that from Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen.
Oh, wow.
So he didn't give it to me. Personally, he didn't come over and say, you are now Imhotep. Alkebulan. Yeah, well, yeah, he was mostly at Cornell. But he taught in Harlem, and he just passed, within the last couple of years. But Dr. Ben was very influential in a lot of people. I got a chance to go to Kemet with him in 1981. Wow. I went with him. Dr. John Henry Clark was on that trip.
Wow.
Dr. Lynn Jeffries was on that trip.
Wow.
And 104 African Americans from all over the country, including Astra Kwesi. It was his first time. It was my only time going. And it was his first time. So it was a great trip. And so, but before then, I had bought Dr. Ben's book, Black Man of the Nile and His Family. And I used to work at Children's Hospital, and I worked on the switchboard. And the switchboard was a central place, and people would come and talk. And there was a sister that came up and talked. And at after our conversation, during our conversation, I said, you know what? From now on, I'm going to be Imhotep Alkebulan. Imhotep was somebody that Dr. Ben, went in at length on his lectures about, and Alkebulan was the name of his publishing company. And Alkebulan, he said, was the oldest indigenous word for the continent of Africa.
Wow.
Well, since that time, I've also found out that Kebu, which is the root of the word, is a netter, and it has to do with the north wind.
Wow. Why was changing your name so important?
You know, I always knew that I was going to change my name. I'm not going to say what my Western name was because I don't want people to think of me in that way or call me that. When people change their name, they don't want you to call them
right.
their
I get that.
Yeah. So I always knew that I was going to change my name. I never liked my name, but I always knew I was going to change it. And one of the main reasons for changing it is because I didn't want to pass on that legacy of slavery on to the next generation. You know, so we were blessed to have two sons, and one of them is named Rahotep Anu Alkebulan. It's kind of a word sound. Rahotep Anu Alkebulan. And Anu is the ancient city which the Greeks called Heliopolis, which is mentioned in the Bible as On. It was a city where the netter Ra was venerated and recognized. And then my second son, we just have two, is Kaba Alkebulan, Kaba Benu Enoch Alkebulan. So Kaba, so the Ka, these are two aspects of the soul, heart, soul, spirit, soul, Kaba. I thought it would be simple for people to say, but it had a profound meaning. And Benu is the Kemetic bird that the Greeks called the phoenix bird. So, and then just before Kaba was born, my wife had an aunt who was getting ready to pass. And we went by and visited her Aunt Jody, and she was sitting up, and she was dressed up. And I said, Aunt Jody, Doris is about ready to have the baby. I said, do you have any names for us? And she said, Enoch. Without blinking, she said Enoch. So we said, well, we got to include that in his name. So Enoch, you know, in the Bible, it's a person who walked with God.
It's a good name.
Yeah.
So with the changing of names, do you feel like that is something a lot of us who are attempting to reclaim that which was taken from us? Do you think that's another reason why a lot of us change our names?
Well, I think that I listened to this lecture by Dr. Amos Wilson one time, and it was Blueprint for Black Power, based upon his book. At the time that I heard him talk, he was not he had not yet completed it, but he said these things. He says, ladies and gentlemen, we are not Africans, you know. And he says, we have the same slave mentality that our slave ancestors did. And he says, I like to ask a series of questions. He says, people always say, you know, they have nothing in common with the people or anything like that. He says, I like to ask, what language do you speak? Do you know, is that the language you were speaking before you were brought to these shores? He says, what uniforms do we wear? You know, were these the clothes? You know, he says, what food do we eat? You know, and then he says, what names do we respond to? He said, were these the names that we were responding to in Africa? You know, and then he says, what God do you worship? He says, what's the name of him? Who taught you to praise him? And then he closed that little segment out with saying, he says, we're not Africans. He says, we are possessed by spirits and demons. And when we speak, we do not speak with our African voice. It is the voice of that demonic presence that uses our lips to speak its own language. So I think when you change your name, you're actually performing an exorcism. You know, we're trying to return to ourselves. And so, you know, a name is very important. In the book Stolen Legacy, there's 9 parts of the soul. And one of them is the Ren, which is the name, which is essential, because if you don't have a name, you know, so a name is very important, and that was one of the things that was stripped from us.
Oh, most definitely. Mm-hmm. Spirituality. You just talked about spirituality. How how do you think we can get back to whatever that original spirituality was that we had before being enslaved in this country?
Well, I think that we need a total. There was a great warrior sister that was an activist. You may have heard of her, Queen Mother Mary Moore.
Yes.
Okay. She came to Wose. This was in the early days of Wose in Oakland, and she came and she one of the things that she said, she had just suffered a stroke, so we weren't seeing her at her best. It was my first time seeing her, and she had a traveling companion. And one of the things that she said is that we need to be denegroized.
Oh, wow.
You know, she just kept saying that. You know, we need to be denegroized. And so all of these things, name change, spirituality, these are denegroizing ourselves. And one of the ways that we denegroize ourselves is not accepting their timeline. So we accept a Western linear timeline, but things are cyclic. So when our ancestors built the I'm not even going to call them pyramids anymore, because their name was Perneter, house of God, or house of the deity.
How are you spelling Perneter?
So P-E-R, per is the Kemetic word for house, and neter is the Kemetic word for principle of divine nature, which Westerners call gods and goddesses. So generally we are taught that, okay, you know, Africans, the ancient Egyptians, they were polytheistic. They had many gods and goddesses. That's not true. We had one God that had many attributes.
I've heard that.
And so there were about 360 neters, or neteru is the proper way to say plural. So, and those 360 all reside in us. They are in essence. So we have 5 senses now that we rely on. Really, we have 360 senses, according to the indigenous wisdom keepers in Kemet.
Wow. So how do we go from Kemet?
Oh, you know, so I didn't really finish answering your question. Okay. So the question is, okay, we are in cycles. So when our people built the Permeters and all of those monuments in Kemet and all over the continent, we were at a higher state of consciousness, and the world was at a higher state of consciousness. And something happened 11,000 years ago. Some people say the Earth was hit by a comet. Some people say because the Permeters were not tombs, they were machines that put out energy, and they were part of a complex that was a 25 square mile complex, which included Saqqara, Giza, Abu Ghraib, and it was referred to as Bu Wizard, the land of Wasir, or the land of Osiris. So at that time, we were dealing on a higher spiritual level. We were using more of our faculties, and so just like, you know, what goes up must come down. So mankind, humankind descended into like a darkness.
Mm.
And now we're coming back out of that darkness. And so when you see people returning to Vodin, or you see people returning to indigenous African spiritual practices, that's what's supposed to happen in this time. We're at the beginning that's coming out of that. So, you know, some people are getting into it earlier, and some people, and by them getting into it earlier, it inspires others. Just think about this. In I think it was 1968, on the cover of Ebony magazine, there was a picture of a black Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And there were black ministers that were going to boycott the newspaper, boycott the magazine. They were going to, you know, they were trying to kill the magazine for putting that on. But just think how far we've come today, even in our Christian churches today. You know, it's not unusual to see the 7 principles of the Nguzo Saba displayed. Mm-hmm. It's not unusual to see a black Christ or Jesus. You know, you have places like the Shrine of the Black Madonna. You have the Church of the Black Messiah that was in Washington, D.C. You have Imani Temple, and you have Wose Community, and which is now referred to as Wose Community. But we started out as Wose Community Church. We started out as a kind of a black nationalist Christian church that evolved into a Kemetic church.
So why do you see so much of the spiritual traditions inside a church, but yet it doesn't necessarily do the same thing as spirituality?
Well, I mean, it's the evolution. I mean, let's see, this was years ago, but somebody told, I told this sister one time that, you know, when I think of black women, all black women to me are like the, you know, black mother and, you know, Madonna and child. And, you know, I wasn't really trying to hit on her or anything like that. I was just saying you know, and she looked at me very seriously and she said, Imhotep, don't ever say that to me again. And she was insulted. And then she sent me through the mail, back then it was snail mail. She sent me this magazine that had things like transcendental meditation, saying things like the God within you. These are all part of the devil. Whoa. You know, so I don't really like to get into religious arguments with people, even though I'm loaded for bear. You know, but it doesn't help me or you. Right. You know, I'll just put it in God's hands. Yeah.
Why do we still see those, some of the when people catch the Holy Ghost or libation? I mean, this, or even when they do communion, or, I mean, we look at them on the surface, but then we know a lot of that stuff is still us coming through. Like, we going to a black church is not like going to a white church.
Sure.
It's like night and day. It's like spirit just shows up differently. Why is that?
You know, that's just the way we approach things. So there's an African church. It's not generally referred to there, but I'm talking about the Church of God in Christ.
Okay.
When you look at say African Methodist Episcopal, I'm not trying to insult anybody. This is an observation. They're more, particularly because they're Methodist, they're more sterile. They don't really get the spirit there necessarily. I mean, they don't, not like in other religious, you know. And then it was a man, actually his granddaughter is a founding member of our church, Wose Community Church. His name was Bishop Mason. And so he formed, along with others, you know, the African church, I'm trying to remember, the Church of God in Christ, which kept in the Africanisms. That was part of their charter. So they kept in speaking in tongues, which is a very real thing. They kept in, getting the Holy Ghost or getting the Spirit. That was a part of them. That there's things that say that he was actually able to raise people from the dead just by praying from them. People that are in that movement, that church, that religious experience. That's what they believe, and that's what they teach. So, if we want to go and look at the way our ancestors did it, this is what we do. We so drumming. We will say we brought the drum back in, because we were denied that, and that's a very spiritual instrument. And I was told by some drummers years ago that there are tones on a drum that a deaf person can hear.
Wow.
It has a Morse code. Similar to Morse code. People could talk, for miles, to let people know what was coming, or this celebration is happening, or whatever. So, but the real spirituality is not on the outside; it's on the inside. And so, when we turn inward, inward through just something as simple as being aware of our breathing. They say that Buddha was able to achieve enlightenment just by doing that meditation where it's called Anapanasati. And I mention him because the oldest pictures of him always portray him as an African-looking person. So just by doing that, we can get more in tune with ourselves. All these trappings, you can wear the clothes, you can wear the locks, you can do all of those things, but really it's going inside. And in the Christian tradition, it's there's a passage that says, "Be still and know I am God."
Brother Keith Herring said, are stones, herbs, and chakras part of African tradition?
So herbs are always a part of the African tradition. The people that were in Haiti, the Hogans and priests there, they were very attuned to knowing the properties and the potential of different plants. And so sometimes they use them as poison for the slave master. Sometimes they use them as healing. Chakra is a word that's an East Indian word, and it means wheel, but it refers to points in the body. Now, generally, when people talk about chakras, they're talking about 7 main points: Muladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipurika, Anahata, Visuddhi, Agna, and Sahasra. Those are the East Indian Hindu names, and those are major junction points for you really have 114 chakras in your body, and these are and they are passageways. There's 72,000 passageways that are called the nadis. And so again, there's different breathing techniques where you can cleanse those, and you can do it. So as far as chakras, I'm not really sure. I've seen different things where people have said, there are Egyptian yoga, which again, when you say that, yoga is a word that's not indigenous African. But I mean, when you look at some of the glyphs, you look at the way the people are posed, they're in yoga postures. So there's obviously a connection. So as far as chakras being a part of the African tradition, there's nothing I can really point them to. Brother Keith, thank you for listening. There's nothing I can really point you to that's African. I would have to do some research, and I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but certainly people were aware of their spiritual centers. They just didn't call them chakras. What was the other part of that question?
He said stones and herbs.
So yes, so stones. If you look at the Perneters or various Purba, House of the Soul, or other places, those places were made with granite, rose quartz. The Great Perneter, the Great Pyramid of Giza. That whole place is rose, granite, quartz, crystal. And so yes, stones were used. There's actually some stones in the medallion of Per-Ah. That's another word that we have to change. Pharaoh is not an indigenous word.
Pharaoh isn't?
It's not. It's not. So just check this out.
Okay.
There's no place in the ancient time called Egypt. There was never a place in the ancient time called Egypt, and there was never a man called Pharaoh.
Wow.
Per-Ah, head of the great house. And really the Per-Ahs were the feminine aspects. And the only way that you could become the Per-Ah is marrying the royal wife. So everything was transferred through matrilineal. Because even today, scientifically, only the woman can be sure it's hers.
Now I'm doing that look because
why are you doing that?
Because I feel like sometimes in the society that we're in, we get played on that. You know what I mean? In terms of like man, but man can't do anything without the woman. Like I was always taught that we're twin halves of the same whole, so we need each other to come, to this planet. But somehow, I don't know where we got to where the man is here and the woman's here, but you can't do nothing by yourself up here. Y'all have to like be together to create. Yes.
So this is the basic. This is the way our traditional African societies. Not all.
I get that.
Not all. There's some patrilineal, and it's probably due to the area where they live.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, if you read Dr. Shekata Diop's Cultural Unity of Black Africa, he talks about the matrilineal societies where the line is traced through the woman. Originally and this is in Barbara Walker's book, Myth and Reality, Encyclopedia of the Woman, Myth and Reality. It talks about how originally in Arabia, before the people from Arabia Deserta came into Arabia Felix. So Arabia Felix means happy. That was the southern area. And then you had people coming in from a more of a desert climate, mixing with the people in Arabia. Before that time, a woman could, if she wanted to divorce her husband, she simply would turn her tent away, I think to the east, for 3 days straight. And that, because it was a matrilineal, that was a matrilineal society originally in Arabia. And before there was Allah, there was Alat, a feminine deity.
Wow. Okay. How did that change though?
Again, the times. We went into darkness. And certain people's phenotype, physiology changed, their whole, they came from a rougher environment, and so then they got put onto the world. So you look at India, you look at if you look at ancient India, or if you look at ancient Persia, which was called Elam, or if you look at ancient Akkadian, which they call Sumer, these were places where Africans or Africoid people inhabited. All that whole what they call Middle East at one time was people that looked like you and me, and people that looked like from the continent. And if we had time, I could show you the pictures. Wow. Where it's in stone. Okay, and then other people came in and invaded and brought in their matrilineal, I mean their patriarchy.
Gotcha.
You know, and so that got forced on us. And then kind of like the figure in Panther, he said, he said, hey, I've learned the ways of the white man, and I'm going to use their tactics against them. And so that's a lot of times that's what happened actually on the continent of Africa. And so that kind of messed us up too.
I get that. That was a great reference when you just said that. That was in the beginning of the movie, the boy's father, right?
Well, no, actually that was what I was referring to was at the end. Killmonger, he's saying that, because okay, he's this great fighter, he's worked for the CIA and he's done all these probably terrible, atrocious things that you do when you're in that organization. Yeah.
That's so.
So he's like, hey, I'm going to use this against them. We're going to take this vibranium and we're going to.
Right. I thought in the beginning his dad was saying that's why he helped him steal the vibranium. He was going to use it in the beginning.
Oh, there were words to that effect. Which, okay, let me just say, I've been waiting 50 years for that movie. Because I used to read all those comics. I used to read all the Marvel, Spider-Man, Thor, Captain America, Submariner, all those. And I was reading a Fantastic Four episode. I was thinking 3rd or 4th grade, 9 or 10 years old.
Right.
And they mentioned the Black Panther. And the Black Panther is mentioned and he's a Black Studies professor.
Wow.
And he's teaching in a high school, but he's also the king of this technologically advanced civilization. So that always stayed with me. And then later on, they actually made a comic book that focused on him, and he was part of the Avengers, etc. If those of you that know that story. And so I've been waiting 50 years for the movie.
What did you think of the movie? I just got it because it came up. What did you think of the Black Panther movie?
I personally thought it was great. I thought there was a lot of authenticity in the movie, just in terms of, location, traditions that were portrayed, things that the people wore. Like for instance, what Angela Bassett had on, that was straight from South Africa. The Xhosa. Whenever you hear the click, that's Xhosa. That's an authentic language. I even heard Trevor Noah saying I didn't need subtitles because I could understand it. They were speaking Kiswahili in that. They were independent of European exploitation and involvement. I really liked that movie, but I've since been on the panel. I've been on Philippe Matthews' show a couple of times with a panel of distinguished people, and I kind of got another view listening to them about Black Panther. So I know that some of my friends that are hardcore Pan-Africanists have a very tough time with the movie. I know that listening to sisters, they have a different perspective on the movie because, and I think about the socialization, the way boys are socialized coming up in this country as opposed to the way girls are socialized. They're not really interested in comic books and superheroes and stuff like that. Where boys are more more interested in those things. So, I had to listen. But for me, it's real. And I brought something I'd like to read.
Yeah, please.
If I may. And I heard this like about 18 years ago. And it was from an indigenous wisdom keeper in South Africa. His name is Credo Mutwa. He's like about 91 now, and he's He's what's called a Sangoma, which and there's actually a word that actually is a higher form of the Sangoma, but he's a priest in the traditional systems. So he knows a lot about traditional systems. And this is what he said. I read this 18 years ago. It's all of my piecing together the Black Panthers.
Okay.
So this is what he said. He said, before human beings were created on this planet, there had existed a very wise race of people known as the Imani Ukala. These people had come from the constellation known to white people as Orion. They had inhabited our earth for thousands and thousands of years, and that before they had left our earth to return once more to the sacred spider constellation, they made a great evacuation under the earth beneath the Missouri Mountains, the mountains of the moon, deep in the bowels of Mother Earth. The Imani Ukala built a city of copper buildings, a city with a wall of silver around it, a city built at the huge mountain of pure crystal, the mountain of knowledge from which all knowledge on earth comes, a mountain to which all knowledge on earth ultimately returns. This old woman told me that her grandmother had told her this story while she was still a virgin of some 15 years or so, undergoing initiation into the mysteries and the culture of the Bahutu people, excuse me. The old woman went on to tell me that many generations ago, there came to the land of the Bahutu a group of little yellow-skinned men who wore colorful robes and strangely brightly colored hats. These men, she said, had come in search of the great city of knowledge, which they had heard many, many years ago stands in the earth under the mountains of the moon, the Missouri mountain range.
That kind of sounds like some of the beginnings of Black Panther.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. So you know, and if you go and look at things that Chadwick Boseman has said, you know, they studied.
Yeah.
They studied this, you know, that so they are familiar with it, you know, so that I bought a suit from an African store called Majesty right off of Elk Grove Boulevard. And the owner of that is a brother by the name of Tunde and his wife. I can't think of his wife's name, but yeah, but I asked him about Black Panther and he just loved it. He recognized it as authentic and, you know, so, but everybody, it's just like anything. It's just like, you know, when I was leaving today, my wife helped me pick out what I'm going to wear. So everybody has an opinion about something.
Right.
You know, so.
Did you feel any spiritual tradition when you looked at the Black Panther, or any spiritual systems, or could you point out some of those to me?
Well,
to us?
I want to give another movie example.
Okay.
Because a lot of things are pointed out, you know, are repeated. A lot of times we see things, like, for instance, if you didn't know better, you would think Michael Jackson invented the moonwalk. Right. When you know that, okay, he learned it from Jeffrey Daniels and some other street dancers. And then you go back further and you can see Bill Bailey, you know, doing it at the end of it. So it's just like that. My sons were riding with me. We were taking my youngest son to school one time at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I had on Pandora and I had on the Roy Air station. And they were playing songs by like Curtis Mayfield, like Move On Up, and other songs like that. And my oldest son, who traveled with us, he said, I just heard all the songs I thought were original. Yeah. So I say all that to say there was a movie called King Solomon's Mines.
King Solomon's Mines?
Mine. Okay, King Solomon's Mine. Deborah Carr, I think Stuart Granger, and Deborah Carr had lost her husband, and so she came to Africa because he was on an expedition safari in Africa. Came to Africa, came to this guy who knew the lay of the land, and she wanted him to take her into the bush. And so without going into a whole lot of rigmarole about the story, they ended up going into the interior with some Africans carrying their luggage and things like that. And they come across this part, and it was signs to the people, to the indigenous people, that was like, don't go beyond this sign. And they wouldn't go by penalty of death. They were being threatened by a gun, and they dropped the things and left. It just so happened that one of the people just coming by was this real tall brother. I don't know if he was 7 feet, but he was tall. He was a Watusi. Mm-hmm. Wakanda, Watusi. So he says, I'll show you where it is. And then he takes them to this place. And it's a great gathering of Africans. There's a king sitting on the throne. But what you didn't know up until that time was that he was coming back to reclaim his throne. So he came back. He opened up his cloak, and he had these keloid. He had a particular design that only the king would have, and I guess his cousin or his brother was sitting on. So he had the same thing. They had to take off the tops of their clothes. They fought a duel, with short spears. And the brother that had come, and had led these white people into the land, he ended up being the king. And so that was played out again in the fight between T'Challa and Killmonger, which I'm sorry I can't think of his African name. I need to get better and remember. I've only seen the movie twice.
Okay. I said 3 times. In that movie, do you think that movie would serve as more conversation between continental Africans and the Africans in the diaspora, or do you think it would be more divisive?
I think it's more of a bringing together. I think that was the other thing that Tunde said. He said on the day that it opened, he said a whole bunch of people came into his store and brought African clothing. I think I'm hoping that it's not going to be like a phase, just a phase, but I think there's going to be an uptick in African consciousness, African-centered thought, food for thought. I think that's going to happen. I think it can only bridge the gap between Africans on the continent and Africans in the diaspora. I really do. So
I also think it's in the time of 45, which sometimes what may seem like a curse could almost be a blessing, because it don't give you many options. It's kind of like when you absolutely understand who your enemy is. So it's not that you don't have this, we're in the era where it's not the middle of the road. He's made sure that we don't have a middle of the road, which means you will have to go to another side. What I mean by that in terms of him being your friend. He don't even like people who want to be his friend. You know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? Like those people now are being displaced. They're going to have to find another way to exist and to live, which is what they should have been doing probably in the first place. But that's just my little take on that. But you know what I mean? I think that's what makes the conversation, seeing people. Because I've heard, like, one of my friends was telling me that a guy, it's a continental African, really insulted her when he said there's more to being an African than wearing dashiki.
He's right.
And so, but she said, so what I mean when I get that part, but sometimes it's like discovering yourself. And so sometimes it's you start wearing clothes, but that's just the beginning of your discovery. But if somebody say, don't wear that, you don't know what it means, you're like, man, I ain't messing with this. You know, so you have to be very careful, because in a way, some of us are like children, even though we may be 60. You know what I do it with this phrase. I learned it from an IBM CE one day, at my job. And back in those days, IBM, were the experts in computers, so when you call them out, right, they knew what, it's a mainframe or a mini computer, they knew what was happening. And that particular day, like our system, whole system went down for the county, for the health department. And I had to call the IBM CE, and it was this guy named Bob, and he came in, and he ended up opening this big book, this big manual, and I said, Bob,
I said, I'm surprised that you have to use the manual. And you know what he said? He said, Mo, that's my friends call me my nickname. He said, Mo, he says, we're all in varying degrees of ignorance.
Mm.
And I held on to that because we are. We have people like Malefia Santi up here, you know, Van Sertima, you know, others that are gone, Dr. Ben, we mentioned, Dr. Jeffries, Dr. Wade. No, we have people up here, and then we have people that's like just wearing African print. They don't know what it is, you know, but it's in style now, you know. So you know, back in the 90s, people were wearing African medallions. Remember those?
Yes, I remember those African medallions.
And they were wearing Malcolm X hat. They were half of, you know, then that went out.
Right.
You know, but we gotta keep it going.
That's
right.
We gotta. That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah.
Tell me about Wose Church, because I know you're still doing the Wose community.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
So Wose community began in 1980 by two Baptist ministers who were ministers in training at Allen Temple Baptist Church in Oakland, which was like largest Black Baptist church in the area. You know, 1,100 people at the 8 o'clock service, 1,200 people at the 11 o'clock service, kind of like St. Paul's in terms of size. And so they were studying there, and they began to read the book. The pastor there, Reverend Dr. J. Alfred Smith, was a very powerful speaker and organizer in his own right, but I don't want to get into him so much. But he availed them to his library. And there they discovered the book by Chancellor Williams, Destruction of Black Civilization. Mm. And so they began to read that book, and that's where they got the name Wose, which is referring to what we now call Luxor or Karnak in Middle Egypt right now. Mm-hmm. And talking about the importance of it being the center of education, being the center of learning. You know, it's where the recognition, the energy of Amen comes, which later on got translated into Amen at the end of prayers. So we were formed in 1980, and we moved up here in Sacramento in 1986, 85, 86. Mm-hmm. And so we've been around for a little while. The name Wose means scepter or seat of authority. The basis of our theology is based upon Mot, which is a Kemetic concept. It means truth, justice, righteousness, propriety, harmony, balance. So you need like 7 English words to describe what it is. Generally, just to make things short, we just say truth, justice, and righteousness. Mm. You know, we have 4 basic holy books here in Sacramento. In Oakland, they've kind of reduced it to 1, but I'm such an old school person, so I still cling to the other 3. But we have 4 basic books. The Hosea, which is a book of a compilation of ancient Egyptian texts, written by Dr. Malana Karinga. We also have Destruction of Black Civilization, which is you know, where Wose's name comes from, by Dr. Chancellor Williams. Stolen Legacy by Dr. George G.M. James, which talks about the Greeks being influenced and actually lifting the concepts that we now call philosophy and incorporated within their own teachings, with their own growth, that many of the people that we know as Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Pythagoras, etc., came there to study and learn. And then the last book is a historical novel written by he's not a doctor, but his name is Ayikwe Arma, and it's called 2000 Seasons. Mm-hmm. So we're not a large group. We were larger in the past, but we're a small group, but we do big things in the community.
Spell Hosea for me, make sure I'm spelling it right.
Husia. That Hosea is a combination of two Kemetic words, hu and sia, which means authoritative utterance and exceptional insight.
So you said Stolen Legacy, 2000 Seasons, the Hosea,
and Destruction of Black Civilization.
Destruction of Black Civilization, sharing those. Sister Alexis wanted to know where your church was, so I went ahead on and tag your Facebook page.
Okay.
So
yeah, but also give our website, which is WOSESAC, WOSE SAC, SAC.com.
Great.
Because that's my personal Facebook page, and I don't necessarily, I put a lot of WOSE things and African-centered things, but, it's my personal page, so, I put a lot of things, but our website, WOSESAC.
When are your services?
Our services are on Sunday, 10:30, to 12:30, but a lot of times they go, in the extra innings, so 1:15, 1:30. Our address is 4311 Attawa, Attawa Avenue. In
Give that address again.
Yeah, 4311 Attawa Avenue.
Okay.
Suite 102, but when you come up to the building, you'll see the sign that says Suite 102.
All right. Put the address down here. Okay, so in our wrap up here, first of all, thank you for coming by to talk with me. It is always a pleasure. How can people listen to you even if they can't make it to church? Like, I know you said you do some.
Yes, so if you search on me on YouTube, Imhotep Alkebulan, IMHOTEP, last name Alkebulan, ALKEBULAN. So I've been doing some studies and programs with Philippe Shock Matthews.
Philippe?
Yes, Philippe Shock. So I'm a terrible speller.
Sorry.
So it's PHILLIPE, I believe.
Shock, jock.
Shock. And that's an acronym, and I forgot what that stands for, but it's very important. I really should commit that more to memory myself. Matthews, and so he's right here in Carmichael, originally from Chicago.
Okay.
And he's kind of like an African Phil Donahue.
Okay.
he interviews a lot of different people, wow. varied people. Some Europeans, some Africans. Just recently, he's been interviewing Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Dr. Wade Nobles, Professor James Small. And there are a lot of people that he seeks out. And so I got a chance to meet him. We were giving him the Marcus Garvey Festival. Mm-hmm. And we're giving it again this year. It's going to be on August 17th, which is Marcus Garvey's birthday. And it's we're in the planning stages now, but looks like we're trying to have it at the San Pernell Center.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. Oh. So we've actually had it at our building, but we had a lot of it outside. And it was so hot, and one person in the past, an elder. Oh. I don't want to call her name. Everybody that's watched the show will know her name. Right. But she actually fainted. It was so hot. Well, I mean, she's fine now. She was fine a couple of days later. But we just said, hey, we're going to change the venue, and to make it a little bit more comfortable for people. But we had the last two ones at our service at our church and at Attawa, but we're going to try to have it at San Pernell.
Wow. Thank you for stopping in and talking with me.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure. Yes. And I want to say that you're looking more beautiful and radiant since that time I met you. And I like the way that you stand up tall. You're a tall sister. You don't slouch. Somebody must have told you.
My mother did not like slouching.
Yeah.
At all.
So I admire that. The way that you carry yourself. Your involvement in the birthing project, and and all the things that you do, the way that you interact with the young sisters and stuff like that. So anything that you asked in terms of helping you out in that situation, just give me a call.
Thank you so much. Okay, family, I'm going to see y'all tomorrow. I may see y'all this afternoon because Brother Ryan may give us an update on what happened yesterday at City Hall. But thank you all for watching. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, family. Peace.